Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking around. And as you probably picked up earlier, I'm Oscar. I'm evangelist for Amplifier. I'm your MC for this room. You are in the right room. This is where all the cool stuff happens. And now we're going to have a fantastic chat with Robby I'm going to get this wrong. ZINCHAK. See, I'm English. I don't know how to pronounce things properly over here. So Robby is going to tell us all about building an MMO by yourself. And did you not win an award yesterday?
I did, in fact, win an award.
You did, in fact. So we're not only are we going to get a great talk on building an MMO, we're also going to get it from an award winner. So I'm going to hand you straight over to Robby. Robby, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, guys. So as mentioned, I'm Robby ZINCHAK. I created an MMO by myself. Can everyone hear me all right? Is this excellent? So yes, I created 8-bit MMO, which I'm going to tell you about today, all by myself. Whether or not developing an MMO by yourself is a great idea or a terrible idea, it's up to you. However, I've been successful at it, and I've had a lot of fun with it, and it's been a fantastic experience for me. And so hopefully you'll be able to take away some good stuff from this talk. So basically, overview, I'm going to tell you about myself, I'm going to tell you about my project, I'll give you a little bit of history of the project, and I'll give you some takeaways that hopefully you're able to apply to your own project in future. Then we'll end with some Q&A. So who am I? Who's this guy who's talking to you? So I've been in the industry professionally for about 7 years now. I've worked for some fantastic companies. I was a producer at Microsoft. I got to make games at Capcom, also at Midway. Had a great time working with these different companies. Got to work on some fantastic projects with some very talented individuals. But ultimately, about 2 years ago, I kind of came to the conclusion that as great as it is to help different people come to fruition on their own visions for games, I really wanted to build my own game. I wanted to drive my own vision. And so 2 years ago, I became a full-time indie. I had often been moonlighting, working on my own indie projects in the past. These are a couple of the ones that I worked on previously, but none of those had really achieved kind of the same level of success as 8-bit. So that's the one we're going to talk about today. What is 8-bit MMO? Well, it's a construction sandbox game where you can build anything you want in a massive persistent universe. Think basically Minecraft being able to build anything in this kind of world, block by block, meets World of Warcraft, where you can build like in this big, massive streaming world with PvP combat, PvE combat, leveling, questing, like all sorts of fun stuff. So I've been working on this project for a long time, and I'm in fact still working on this today. I'm continuing to develop as kind of the games as a service model where I'm continuing to update it with new features and content and all that great stuff. But I got started on this 12 years ago, so I've been working on this for a little while. I was originally inspired by like Ultima Online and playing that sort of game, and like, this is a great game, but what if I could, as a player, build the world around me? And so I've tried different engines. I've played around with different visual styles, trying 2D, kind of isometric. Even in 2007, I had a full 3D engine that had network physics, and it was like over the top. But I found out that if you have a 500 meg download and you have a system reboot required, that your user funnel gets super narrow. So around 2011, when I went full time on the project, I rewrote it into Java. And at that point, anyone could play it just by opening a web browser as long as they had Java installed, which a fair number of people still do. And so once people could just open a web browser and play it, instantly I had so many more players. And I was able to get a lot of great user feedback. I started posting the game to the popular forums, TigSource, IndieDB, the Dwarf Fortress boards. Started getting a lot of great feedback. People were talking about, initially when I first released kind of the very, very first playable, there was no tutorial, there was no introduction. It just dropped you in the game with a whole bunch of really powerful building tools, but you had no idea what was going on. And so the very first thing I did is I started adding signs to help you kind of learn this environment. Had a lot of performance issues on the client, fixed those, got the frame rate better, and depth perception. Initially the game had, some issues with kind of Z ordering, and so what I did is I added shadows around the objects as well as outlining, which really helped differentiate the different Z levels in the game. Then around January, February, I got pretty serious about it, started adding metrics to the game. That really helped me make informed decisions about what, as a single-person studio, you really got to prioritize your time. And metrics really helped me do that. For instance, I saw that nobody was reading the signs and therefore had no idea what to do. And so I revamped the tutorial again. And this time the tutorial was a system of quests. And each quest kind of teaches you a little bit more about the game and draws you through the experience. And it's a lot more engaging. And so instantly players were a lot more familiar with what they had to do. Another thing on the tutorial is that initially I had a monster that could kill you in the tutorial. And even though the penalty for death is you have to walk 5 feet to where you were, it's very minor, just dying in the tutorial is enough to send players away at a very high % rate. And so what I did is I created a new monster. The original monster was the lawyer cat, who's very dangerous. You got to watch out for lawyer cats. So I added congressional lobbyist slugs, who can kind of follow you around. They look menacing, but they actually can't hurt you. And that was really influential for keeping people in the initial tutorial experience. Also, grief protection. You can imagine big persistent world game where you can build anything. You just have random internet trolls come and break stuff. So I added grief protection to prevent that so that people wouldn't get kind of frustrated and leave. Started adding town support, so basically you can place down a town stone and you become the mayor of your town, and that's really effective. That's when I started noticing the community started building up, because people would work together to build towns together, and that kind of built up the community of the game. Then around February 16th, I had a trailer that I released, and I just posted on Reddit. I think it got like 10 upvotes, and I was like, yeah, I got upvotes. And I go to sleep, and the next morning I find out that Indie Games had posted it to their blog. And then Rock, Paper, Shotgun saw it on there, and they posted it on their log. And so I wake up, and the server's basically on fire. And as you can imagine, that was a very fun experience. What it came down to is I had done some load testing, but I had done it wrong. And in the takeaway section, I'll teach you, at least from my perspective, how to do it right. At this point, I also added basic functionality for like automatically rebooting the server if it falls over. So at 4 in the morning, it's not just down until I wake up. Same thing with save and crash dumps. You can find that out later. It was really helpful for pinpointing these issues. Started seeing Let's Play videos. I love these because they're basically like focus tests where the player has to explain what's going on, and they have to kind of narrate, so it'll be an entertaining Let's Play video. And when I was watching those, I saw that players had a lot of issues with what do I need to interact with in this world. And so I added quest icons above the heads of the NPCs they had to interact with, and that really helped them draw them to the correct location. Around March 2012, that was my big official launch. I thought I was ready for big exposure, and so I made a new trailer. I had a press release. I got a whole bunch of coverage. I was on Joystick and Massively and like all these great places. You know, I found out even more information from there. You know, getting information about kind of the zoom level. A lot of players wanted it to be a little bit further back, and that really helped with the visual style, I think. Server scalability was still problematic, although it was a whole lot better than it was before that. And the referral bonus system. So, you know, basically I just added this kind of, you know, basically a reward for if you share this game with a friend. And I implemented it primarily because everyone else was doing it. I'm like, this must be good if everyone's doing it. But I didn't really expect anyone to do it. But of course I implemented that, and, you know, instantly there was some virality built into the game, and it was actually really powerful. So I continued updating the game. I was adding lots of new features, and I figured that, you know, the press isn't going to cover like every single minor update. So what I did is even though I was updating the game constantly to the community, I kind of batched all those changes into one big press release, and I called it the S8 update. And it had a whole bunch of new features. It had zombies and maps and clothing and hats. The trailer was awesome. It was amazing. The netcode was solid. The performance, it just stayed online. But it didn't get as much of a news bump. And I kind of learned through that process that, you know, unless you're like a big indie title or you know AAA title, and there's a solid fan base around your game who's interested in, you know, being on Joystick or whatever and reading those updates, you're not necessarily going to get an update on the news websites for every single, you know, press release you send out. If you're lucky, they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and do your kind of big launch announcement. But I mean, you got to put all your effort there. And moreover, you can't really rely on the press for all of your traffic. You got to kind of diversify your strategy. So from June to October, I started working on the new engine. So the previous engine that was currently in use was very limiting, and so I took kind of a step back and started kind of working on a new hardware accelerated engine. And so I posted this blog post June 29th of 2012 talking about the new engine, talking about how this was coming soon. This is still not out. But it's actually paved the way for some exciting stuff that I'm going to talk about in the future. But that being said, was it necessarily the smartest thing to work on that then? Maybe not. Maybe I should have continued working on adding new content updates. So around October 2012, ran out of money. that's usually problematic for game development. Fortunately, I had some good opportunities come up at that time. It was a very standard indie story where you go do some contract work and bring some money in so that you can fund your passion project. And so I did that, and I actually got to learn some new technologies and got to work with some great people on that. And then in May 2013, I'm now doing my second run of being a full-time indie working on this project again. I'm adding all sorts of new content into the game. I'm adding new objects that make it a lot easier for players to find where to build in the wilderness. New items in dungeons to really help players get through the dungeon and incentivize that. Player versus player is now in the game. There's a leveling system. And I'm now part of a really cool startup program, or a startup incubator program in Seattle called The Reactor. And they're really helping with mentorship and kind of helping me kind of achieve my goals. So what's coming in the future? Well, I want to up the one-day retention. That's really my biggest weak point. If I can improve that, and I got some ideas about improving the combat gameplay, and once I'm in a really good spot there, well, then it's time for the sequel, which is based on that new engine. And that's, of course, 8-bit MMO. What's one more than that? 9-bit MMO. So that's the sequel. So look forward to that. All right, so here's kind of the takeaways that I want to share with you guys. Hopefully you guys are able to apply these to your own projects. Load testing. So what I was doing is I was just checking the frame rate, the server frame rate, over the course of 10 seconds, averaging that out. I'm like, oh yeah, I got 1,000 frames per second. This is awesome. I just throw players in here. It'll work great. No, that did not happen. Instead, what happened is that I would see hitching. What I should have been doing is measuring the amount of time between frames. Once I started doing that, there's different ways that you can do that. One way that I did that is through profiling tools, and those are really handy. But what was actually more helpful is just 8 blocks of code. I mean, it's super simple code here. Don't copy this directly because it's kind of awful, but use the strategy involved. Basically, it's an object. You can instantiate this object in a particular function that you want to instrument. And it's basically like a warning system. So if this function is taking longer than 100 milliseconds, then it kind of, in the server log, it kind of raises its hand. It's like, hey, you should probably take a look at this. This is something that you want to optimize. And doing a whole bunch of this really helped me pinpoint what the critical path is. I found some areas where it was like as much as 4 or 5 seconds of delay, and everyone on the server, they would just kind of freeze for 4 seconds. And so once I started instrumenting this, it really helped me be able to handle the load that I was getting. So the map system, I implemented this map system just so players could find their way through the game easier. But what I found out is that whenever I showed this to people, they got super excited about the game. And so I started factoring this into my demos. It was the thing I'd close my demos on. And so for you, when you're looking at your game, when you show your game to people, if you find that you're surprised by something they get really excited about, consider factoring that into kind of your spiel that you give to folks. Distributors are awesome. I really like working with both Amazon and Congregate. They're both fantastic partners. And they're great because not only do they provide you with traffic and players and kind of instant community, which is awesome, but B, they can also provide you with monetization advice. This was my first free-to-play project. And for me, I had to learn free-to-play as I was going. Which, as you can imagine, it was kind of a rough ride. But once I was able to talk to these guys, they actually provided me a lot of advice on how to do free-to-play correctly, how to monetize well. And I actually managed to get to the point where now, like, my top player has spent over $3,000 in the game. Just one guy by himself. So, clearly there's some potential in, the monetization that I'm doing currently. These guys have some fantastic lessons. Congregate is, in fact, here at the conference and has been giving some great presentations. All their stuff is available online. So I highly recommend if you're interested in free-to-play, watch some of these guys' stuff. They're great. Listen to your community. Having the community as part of the game development experience is really powerful. Not only does it help you figure out what you need to have in your game, but it also brings them into the fold and makes them feel like they're part of the process. And that's really cool. So this is user voice. Google also has a Google moderator tool, and both of them are very good tools from the perspective of people come in, they enter their suggestion, and then other players can upvote that suggestion. And then so at any given time, you can find out what's the most important thing that I should be working on. What's the hottest issue in the community? You got to watch out. A lot of times they'll be like, make everything free. So you can't just necessarily go off that list. But at the same time, I've seen a lot of great suggestions, and I've implemented a lot of great suggestions that came through the community. So In hindsight, this is painfully obvious, but beware of the bad loops. So if you have any sort of iterative loop that's just going to grow with the size of your game, be careful of that. So I had some ON loops in my game, and that worked great when I had like 2,000 things in the game. But once I was scaling into the millions, no, that did not work out well. Fortunately, I was able to find some really good techniques. I recommend, I've been really enjoying handles. There's a link on the slides that you guys can check out later to read more about that data structure. But basically, it's O1 complexity, which is like really, really fast, even over millions of objects. It's very handy. And of course, you have to always keep in mind, what do you want to cache? What do you want to do database hit? When you're ever accessing the database, it's super slow. It takes forever. But at the same time, you can't cache everything. So you always have to keep that in mind. Tutorial. I've already talked about the tutorial a lot, but that's because you're going to spend way more time working on your tutorial than you ever want to. I've rewritten mine like 4 times, and I'm probably going to rewrite it 2 more times in the future. You get 10 seconds to engage to the player who's just coming in playing a free-to-play game. If they don't like it, they're just going to quit after 10 seconds. If they stay for 10, they'll stay for 60. If you manage to get them to stay around for 60, they'll stay around for a little bit longer. But that first experience is super important. If you lose people, they'll just go to the next thing. There's so many other options out there. So make sure that the tutorial makes sense, make sure it's engaging, make sure it's fun, and hopefully that'll ease players into your gameplay. Something I'm going to keep working on, and I know that a lot of people are working on it too. Press kit. I see a lot of indies have trouble with this, but you want to make sure your press kit is available early. The press might find you before you're really ready for them to find you, but you should have something available so that if they do find you, they don't just grab a screenshot of your web page. You want them to have the best assets available. You want them to have the best screenshots. When you have your video, include both the download of it as well as the YouTube link. If you don't, they'll just rip your YouTube video at 360p or some terrible resolution. So include the high quality video download. Fact sheet with all your contact info, your logo, probably high quality resolution as well as web quality resolution, key art with all your characters. I know people who sometimes are kind of skittish about providing layers for that sort of thing, but it's actually really important. So as I said before, continuously iterate, continuously work with your community. Make this game as best as you can by working with your community. Be careful about what contest you enter. We have very small budgets as indies, so anything that's free, absolutely enter. If you have to pay $100 and you're not even getting the judges' anonymized feedback, then you might want to question that. I've entered some contests, and they didn't even redeem the game codes, even if I spent $100 entering that contest. So just be careful. Exhibit everywhere you can. You're here at Casual Connect. A lot of you are in the indie space over there, so you guys already know this. Game lists. These are great. Index sites. They provide continual traffic, so add this into your mix of user acquisition. Game trailer. Key message here is don't have something longer than 90 seconds. People don't have time for it. You want to make it fast and to the point. Create your budget. Make sure that you're sticking to it over time, because otherwise you'll run out of money and then you'll have to kind of go back and do that cycle again. Free to play. As indie developers, we have to be really careful so that we're providing the best impression to players. A lot of players have been poisoned by kind of the Zynga model, where it's kind of predatory. So we have to provide a really high quality experience and build customer trust. And finally, have fun. This is what we're all here for. We're making these games because we're following our passion. And there's never been a more exciting time to be an indie. This is an update I did, and I was just bored one Friday night, so I made potatoes as a playable race in the game. It's the only MMO with realistic potato role-playing technology. This ended up getting more views than my trailer did, just through Reddit virality. Remember why we're here. We're here because we're excited about being indies. We're following our passion. There's never been a better time to be an indie, and I don't know about you, but I'm really excited to be part of this indie revolution that's happening right now. So that's my talk. Thank you very much. I hope you took something useful away from it.
Thanks, Robert. That was fantastic. So I'm going to pass over to questions. So who's got the first question? Or I'm going to get talking. There we go.
Hey, just wondering, do you do all your own art and audio assets, or do you outsource, or do you use any procedural generation or anything like that? or do you just do it all by hand?
I do it all by hand.
Wow, that's impressive. And you managed to do all the programming as well? That's really impressive.
Yeah, I do everything. It's a one-man army. Fortunately, I have a fantastic community, and the community kind of builds the world. So I basically provide the tool set. I provide, the art assets and like each, individual block. But then they take these blocks and they do things that I had never even imagined. Like, I am really impressed and just honored to have such a fantastic community that has built around this game. Like, they do everything from, build in the game. They write game articles on the wiki. They write fan fiction about this game. Like, it's awesome. I love these guys.
Cool. Any more? Oh, sorry. Let me get the mic so we can get it on the camera.
You said you do everything. What tools do you use to do the different things?
Sure. So on the code side, I use C++ on the server. I use Java on the client. I use MySQL for the database, Photoshop for the art, and those are the main ones. Yeah.
Anyone else? Back again. There. All good. All good.
Do you host your own server, or do you use like Amazon AWS or something like that in the cloud?
I am actually using SoftLayer for the dedicated server. I've tried using different virtualized solutions, and so far there's just a little bit too latency when you have kind of a virtualized cloud solution. So I'm using like the bare bones hardware, and I find it's fast. It's actually cheaper a lot of times than using the cloud offerings, and it works really well.
Cool. How do you actually handle like scaling?
Sure. So the server is built around a sharding system. So if any time I see that there's a high enough number of players that I need to spin up another server, basically I can kind of copy the database into a new set of databases and spin up that shard. There's a server select screen that's currently just hidden and disabled in the game, but I can actually enable that with a single flag.
Any more? I mean, I've got a question actually. Sure. So it says on your bio you've been involved with sort of Microsoft and Capcom and Midway. I mean, making that transition to go solo must have been kind of quite a traumatic experience in some way. I mean, is that fair, or what was it like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's especially like that first weekend that I went indie. I had left my job. I had lost my house, and I was basically couch surfing, so essentially homeless. So it was a very dramatic change. But within I kind of got myself back up. I had, I found some good space. I'd right-sized into the kind of a space that I could afford to live in for a year and just focus on the game. I was able to just focus on kind of improving the game. Especially at that point, I was basically taking it from a tech demo to something that was fully playable and releasable. And so it was a very it was a traumatic experience, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
But maybe not recommending the going homeless bit.
I don't recommend that. If you can manage to schedule it so that you're changing one thing in your life at a time, that's great.
I imagine so. Any more questions? Oh, there we go. Thanks.
You mentioned your community has been very important to you, and you've been listening to them through feedback and everything. Is there ever a risk, especially for a small one-man shop or something, of becoming too beholden to the community, or kind of, I guess, it may sound paradoxical, but setting expectations too high, like if you respond to every comment right away, that the community may expect certain things from you or expect direct feedback?
Yeah, that's totally fair. So what I do to manage that, what I see most frequently is that I generally stick to kind of Monday through Friday work schedule, and so people will pop on sometimes on the weekends. Especially when I first started, I was doing 7 days a week, and people would kind of expect immediate response over the weekend or what have you. But what I basically set up is a kind of a consistent schedule. So now I'm Monday through Friday. The first thing I do when I get into the office is I go to the forums, I check out the chat room, I respond to the user suggestions, and so I set it, the expectation that I do that once a day at the beginning of the day, and then I set aside the rest of the day for development time. I'll pop into the chat room, I'll see what's going on, but the rest of the day is kind of like, all right guys, I need to focus. And once they have that expectation, once they understand that process, then they're very sympathetic to it.
It still sounds like a lot of work for just one person. I mean, we had a conversation similarly earlier on about the whole nature of community, and I mean, one of the things that I found back in the days when I was running this online gaming service, Wireplay, was it was so important to engage the community to help have the community help me manage the community. Yep. Do you find that helps? Is that sort of thing still possible, scalable in this vast sort of connected world?
Absolutely, yeah. So basically, I have a moderator system. So some of the users who have been playing for a long time and are very trusted and well respected within the community itself have been promoted to kind of moderator status, and that gives them special permissions in the game, and they're able to help out with, teaching new players if they have questions, responding to that, moderating the forums, make sure there's not like spam or anything, cleaning up blocks. Sometimes people will build things they shouldn't build in the game, and the moderators can go in and they have some special powers to kind of clean up the world. And so, without those guys, I'd be lost. And I'm just, again, I'm super grateful for the community and to the moderators for being willing to kind of invest their time.
Cool. Any more questions? Last one. Yep, go for it. Yep.
What kind of KPIs do you monitor?
Sure. Great question. So for the longest time, I wasn't following any KPIs. That's a bad strategy. You shouldn't do that. I've been following, the key one is 1 day retention. That's the one I'm working on really hard right now. My 1 month retention is actually pretty solid. Basically, if they stick around for a day, they'll stick around for like a long time, which is awesome. I've also been, the kind of all the standard ones, DAU, MAU, ARPU, etc. All the good ones.
Right, on that note, I'm going to thank everybody, particularly Robbie. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentation. It's been excellent. And we're going to move on to the next one. So thanks, everybody. Cool.